Child actor Carl Alfalfa Switzer's tragic end seemed like an open and shut case. But years later, a new witness revealed the disturbing truth about what happened that night. Carl Switzer's spontaneous discovery by a Hollywood producer reads like entertainment folklore. His exit, however, sounds more like a cautionary tale. Poor Switzer went from being one of the most recognized faces in television, Alfalfa and Our Gang, to pilfering trees from the forest to sell at Christmas time. It was a steady but not so slow decline from child actor to adult felon. His short, tragic life was an absolute train wreck. Paris was the birthplace of American actor Carl Switzer, except it was the one in Illinois, not France. The Switzer family made a trip to sunny California and were taking a film studio tour when they ducked into a cafe for refreshment. Carl and his brother Harold did what they did best, put on an impromptu show for the other guests. As luck would have it, the head of the studio walked by and took in the boys' performance. What happened next sounds like a Hollywood myth. The owner of the studio, Hal Roach, was completely bowled over by the boys' ability and charisma. He wanted to sign both of them to Our Gang right there on the spot. Our Gang was a series of short films centered around a group of poor children, which later morphed into the TV show The Little Rascals. Once on the show, Harold became a side character named Slim, or sometimes Deadpan. Carl, on the other hand, had just one name, Alfalfa. Carl's brother Harold didn't do that well on Our Gang. He was soon relegated to the background in most of his scenes. Alfalfa, however, was soon delighting audiences. Ironically, Switzer's musical ability wasn't what helped him win audiences over. Strangely enough, it was actually his ability to hide his talent that made the character unforgettable. You see, one lovable aspect of Switzer's Alfalfa was his terrible singing voice. Time and time again, Alfalfa would give his rendition of a Bing Crosby tune, but completely off-key. Of course, Switzer could have done it in perfect pitch if he'd wanted to, but audiences came to love his atonal renditions of popular songs. But there was something else that drove audiences wild about Alfalfa. The hair and wardrobe department on Our Gang had an inspired idea about how Switzer should look as Alfalfa. They fashioned an incredible cowlick that stuck straight out from his head. Along with Switzer's natural freckles, it made Alfalfa stand out amongst the other kids. The problem was, he was starting to stand out far more than Our Gang's star. Everything had worked out for Carl Switzer thus far, but there was trouble brewing. Before Switzer joined Our Gang, the show centered on the good-natured Spanky, played by George McFarland. Switzer's arrival as Alfalfa was soon pulling focus away from McFarland's character. Fans responded and soon Alfalfa was everyone's favorite Our Gang character. This was great for Switzer, but what did it do for the friendship between the two boys? Remember, Switzer and McFarland were just 10-year-old boys when they were making Our Gang. They likely were unaware that they were rivals for celebrity, or didn't care. The two remained friends and refused to heed to the pressure that being on TV served them. Their fathers, on the other hand, didn't show such restraint. Switzer's father made it his business to ensure his son got the treatment he deserved. This meant enough screen time and lines. Of course, Spanky's father also had an interest in the show and wanted his son to retain his position as the show's star. The fathers reportedly argued constantly about their son's screen time and something else: salaries. Amidst all the bickering, Switzer just wanted to have fun. Unfortunately, fun was in short supply on set, so he did his best to make it himself. While their fathers were arguing, the two boys were mostly doing what boys did, which included practical jokes. Switzer in particular was fond of holding up filming with not only practical jokes, but also being abrasive and difficult to work with. Some may put this down to boys being boys, but sometimes Switzer went too far. Switzer was always looking for ways to prank his co-stars, and the one-upmanship, at least on one occasion, had dangerous results. Switzer got into his head to hide fish hooks in Spanky's pants pockets. When McFarland sat down, the fish hooks dug into his backside. The wounds were so deep that McFarland required stitches after this prank. Unfortunately for our pal Alfalfa though, the good times were about to stop rolling. All good things must come to an end, and this was true about Switzer's job on our gang. He was starting to look a little old to be part of the gang, so Roach set him free. It was 1940 and Switzer was just 12 years old. Surely he had a wonderful life in show business ahead of him. After all, he was one of the most recognized child actors in America. What could go wrong? Apparently, a lot. Switzer followed up his career as the #1 kid on our gang with, well, a bunch of small supporting roles. Embarrassingly, Switzer even appeared in an our gang ripoff called Regular Fellers. His career wasn't moving forward, it was going downhill. If that wasn't bad enough, 1942's Johnny Doughboy would cement Switzer's reputation as a 15-year-old has-been. Switzer nailed an audition for the musical comedy Johnny Doughboy, but nailing it probably wasn't that hard. You see, the role was for a child actor who couldn't make it as a young adult performer. That may have been a little too close to home for Switzer. In 1944, when he was 17 years old, Carl Switzer appeared in The Great Mike. Here, Switzer plays the lead character's goofy friend and has lines that mostly amount to things like, "Gee willikers." That sounds a lot like what Switzer was doing as Alfalfa back on our gang. It seemed that elevating himself out of the our gang mode was going to be a rough go for Switzer. To make sure audiences and producers forgot all about Alfalfa, Switzer did two things. He updated his resume, changing all references to our gang to simply read MGM Short Project. The other thing he did seems like something he should have done a long time ago. He stopped calling himself Carl Alfalfa Switzer. Believe it or not, in all movies until this time, this was how his name appeared in credits. But would it be enough to save his career? Unfortunately, it was too little, too late. Even with Alfalfa off his resume, the following year saw Switzer still appearing in very small roles. In the Bing Crosby musical White Christmas, things got even worse. Switzer appears only in a photograph. These weren't the roles of a successful actor, and Switzer knew it. Maybe movies weren't going to do it for him. Well, there was always television. Switzer did a slew of TV shows from 1952 to 1955, but nothing really stuck. He did return to the big screen, but again in tiny roles. In The Ten Commandments, Switzer was simply called Hebrew Slave. His final role, however, was in a hugely successful film, The Defiant Ones. Again, Switzer's role was small, but the film garnered a number of Academy Award nominations. It was a fine way for Switzer to say goodbye to Hollywood. But if he was saying so long to acting, what was he saying hello to? In addition to acting, Switzer had another vocation. He bred and trained hunting dogs. Because of his connection to Hollywood, he had some noteworthy clients. Alfred Hitchcock favorite James Stewart was a client, as was Henry Fonda. He also worked for his godparents, the country singing duo Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. As we'll soon see, however, it was this hobby that brought on Switzer's early and tragic demise. In 1954, Switzer made a massive mistake. He married a woman who he'd only gone out with for just 3 months. Her name was Diantha Collingwood, and the two met on a blind date. Collingwood was from a wealthy family who dealt in grain. By 1956, things weren't looking too good for the newlyweds. Collingwood was pregnant, and Switzer's acting career money was close to running out. It was a desperate time, and it needed a desperate measure. Switzer's mother-in-law wasn't happy with her daughter's state of affairs. The truth was that Switzer had no prospects, and his mother-in-law knew it. So she proposed something unorthodox. She gave them a farm. Switzer, his wife, and his child made an abrupt move from California to Kansas, where they were going to give farm life a try. Maybe Switzer was imagining being the lord of the land, but the truth was that this former child star was just going to be a glorified farm worker. Switzer hated it, and within a year he packed it in, but that wasn't all he'd had enough of. Switzer wasn't just through with farm life, he was also through with marriage and being a father. In 1957, he divorced his wife and returned to single life. He moved back to California and, well, had a hard time of it. In 1958, Switzer was minding his own business and getting into his car. That's when he heard the unmistakable sound of a car backfiring. Or was it something else? When Switzer heard the car backfiring, he also felt something, an intense pain in his right arm. It turned out that the loud blast wasn't a car backfiring after all. Switzer looked down and saw blood all over his clothes. He'd been shot in the arm. Officers looked everywhere for the shooter and could find no one. Was this simply a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time? Or something more sinister? The truth is, we'll never know. Officers never found a shooter, so we still have no idea who shot Switzer. At least, the first time. In December of the same year, Switzer took a drive through the spectacular Sequoia National Forest. Was he a great lover of nature? Not really. Switzer thought it would be a great idea to chop down pine trees and sell them to families as Christmas decorations, all of which was completely unlawful. The authorities caught him, and he received a sentence of 1 year of probation and a fine of $225. Except Switzer was flat broke and couldn't pay the fine. That was an even bigger problem than he realized. In need of some extra cash, Switzer turned to an old vocation of his, dog training. This was something Switzer had done off and on for years. In order to pay his fine, Switzer agreed to help a man train his dog. The man was Moses Samuel Stilts, and Switzer had met him while working for Roy Rogers. Like most of Switzer's escapades, there was soon trouble. While Switzer was training Stilts' dog, the dog saw a bear and ran off in pursuit. Switzer made a vain attempt to recapture it, but he couldn't keep up. The horrible truth dawned on Switzer. He'd lost a dear and valuable pet. When Switzer told Stilts what had happened, the dog owner was furious. He told Switzer that he had two choices: bring the dog back or pay him what it was worth. Switzer's solution to the missing dog was to throw more money at the problem, money that he didn't actually have. Switzer took out advertisements in the local newspaper, which offered a reward of $50 for anyone who found the dog and brought it to the bar where Switzer was working. A frantic Switzer went to the bar and waited, but what were the chances that someone would actually find this missing dog? Switzer couldn't believe his eyes when the bar door opened and in walked the missing dog. Of course, behind the dog was the rescuer, who quickly demanded the reward. Switzer gave the man all the money he had, $35 in cash. The remaining $15 he gave him in bottles of spirits from the bar, one of the perks of working there. Switzer returned the dog to Stilts, problem solved. Or so it should have been. A few days later, Switzer got to talking with a buddy, Jack Piot. The two men were discussing the whole dog debacle and they came up with an opinion. They thought it wasn't right that Switzer had to pay the reward. They thought that the dog's owner, Stilts, needed to pay Switzer back, at least the $35. The two men decided that there was no time like the present. They went straight to Stilts' house. Switzer didn't know it yet, but he'd never return home alive. Stilts lived in Mission Hills with his wife, Rita Corrigan, and his 3 stepchildren. Switzer and Piot made their way to Mission Hills, located the house, and stepped up to the door. The two men were pretty charged up. They wanted the $35, and they weren't leaving without it. What happened next? Well, that depends on who you believe. Stilts' story has Switzer and Piot threatening him before they even got into the house. Apparently, they were pounding on the door and shouting, "Let me in! I'll kick the door in!" Somehow, the two men entered the house, and a struggle began. Stilts didn't know who it was, but either Switzer or Piot grabbed a glass clock and hit him over the head with it. This led Stilts to making a tragic decision. He grabbed his firearm. This little struggle over $35 was heading to a very dark place. According to Stilts, he and Switzer struggled with the firearm when suddenly, bang! It went off. The blast almost hit Stilts' stepson. At this point, Stilts says that Switzer threatened him with a large blade and said, "I'm going to kill you." Stilts maintains that he had no choice but to shoot Switzer. He got him in the groin, which caused internal bleeding. An ambulance came, but Carl Switzer passed before he even got to the hospital. There was another version of what happened between Switzer and Stilts that night that came from an eyewitness. Stilts' 14-year-old stepson, Tommy Corrigan. Corrigan told his version to the detectives, and there were definitely some disagreements with Stilts' narrative of the night. But then, when the trial began, something alarming happened, or actually didn't happen. Corrigan was never asked to testify. The judge bought Stilts' self-defense story, and the case was quickly closed. Tommy Corrigan knew something, but the public was never going to find out what it was. At least not for a very long time. Fast forward 42 years. It's January 25th, 2001, and little Tommy Corrigan, who was just 14 on the night in question, was now 56 years old and finally ready to give his version of the events.
For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factinate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details.
He said it all started with a knock on the door. Following the knock, a muffled voice said that it was Western Union for Bud Stilts. Tommy's mother, Rita Corrigan, reluctantly opened the door and revealed not Western Union, but an inebriated Carl Switzer and his friend Jack Piot. Things went south pretty quickly. Switzer was complaining to Corrigan that her husband owed him $35 for the reward. He also said he would beat Stilts up if he didn't get his money. Stilts quickly entered the room holding a .38 caliber revolver. The presence of a gun probably shocked Switzer, but he grabbed for it anyway. The two men struggled over the revolver. The situation was extremely tense. Corrigan's children were in the room, and the revolver could have gone off at any second. Piot saw that nothing good could come of the situation, so he looked around the room for something heavy to hit Stilts with. His eyes fell on a glass clock. Piot took the clock and hit Stilts over the head with it. Around the same time, the revolver fired. There was the sickening sound of shrapnel entering flesh. Everyone froze. It wasn't clear who'd been hit. Sadly, it was young Tommy Corrigan who'd been hit. A fragment had lodged into his leg. Rita Corrigan's two young daughters were in the room and were clearly distraught. The girls ran out of the house to go to the neighbors, screaming for help. Switzer surveyed the room. Tommy was bleeding, and Stilts' eye was quickly swelling up. Things didn't look good. Switzer had the peace of mind to make a rational decision. Tommy remembers hearing Switzer say, "We shot Tommy, enough of this." Switzer and Piot made their way to the door, trying to end this volatile situation, and that was when Tommy heard another blast. But this time, it wasn't him who got hit. Tommy spun around to see what had happened, and he saw something that he'd never forget. Switzer was bloody, sliding down the wall, and the expression on his face, utter surprise. Stilts had shot him. Tommy saw that his stepfather was operating on automatic. He didn't seem to have the ability to think. Tommy watched as Stilts turned and pointed the revolver at the other intruder in his house, Piot. Stilts pushed Piot up against the kitchen counter and told him that he was going to end his life. Just then, Tommy remembers hearing sirens in the distance. He believes that was the only reason that Stilts didn't follow through on his threat. In case the message from Tom Corrigan's story isn't clear, he made it so. He told reporters that his stepfather didn't have to kill Switzer. This meant the original ruling, that it was self-defense, wasn't necessarily correct. If Corrigan had actually told this story to the detectives on the case back in 1959, it makes you wonder why they never asked him to testify. A retrial was out of the question. Stilts had passed in 1983. In 1956, Switzer had appeared as a slave in Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments. While the two men's lives were vastly different, they did share one thing. They passed on the very same day. Sadly, this meant Switzer's mentions in the press took a back seat to the much more famous DeMille's. The two men also shared a resting place, Hollywood Forever Cemetery. In 1983, General Foods was looking for a way to sell a new product, Jell-O Gelatin Pops. The ad department decided to recreate characters from our gang and make 30-second commercials featuring Alfalfa, Spanky, and Buckwheat. If you watch the ads closely, you may recognize the actor playing Alfalfa. It's Seth Green, who went on to find fame in Austin Powers and Robot Chicken. Clearly, he wasn't cursed by the character of Alfalfa like Carl Switzer. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want a say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.